BodhiAvasa. Can you explain what do you mean when you say that the world is your reflection, is your mirror?
Everything that we see in our world is the way we've constructed energy within ourselves. That energy appears in what we believe to be an outer reality, according to the way we think and the way we feel. Every object that we look at is part of an energy field that reflects, in a sense, the state of our consciousness. So, as within, so without. What we feel and think, what we identify with as personal thoughts and feelings, tend to be what stands out in our outer reality. So everything we are looking at, how we respond or react to it, is dependent on what we feel within ourselves and how we think about what we feel. Everything, therefore, is a reflection. Everything that we see right now as shape and colour and thought and feeling is a reflection of nothing. What is looking at those apparent separate objects is nothing. And this nothing is what we actually refer to when we use the word I. And it is this nothing that is creating everything. It's a reflection. The world is a reflection of nothing.
So this reflection is not personal. It's not a personal reflection.
Well, the I is not person. The I is neither a person nor impersonal. In order for something to be impersonal, we would have to hold the concept of personal in consciousness. The I is just I, it's empty. It's not I from the point of view of somebody. It's simply I. It's not personal at all.
So when in certain spiritual circles one says, I did manifest that, I did create that, is it correct? Because it sounds as if there is personal creations separated from each other.
Well, if we rest in the realization that I is utterly impersonal, there's nothing by which you can describe that I, then it would be correct to say that I is what is creating everything. The moment we say I am creating everything, we personalize it. And from the point of view of the person, which is totally imaginary, as there is no person present in creation except as an idea, an image, from there it's not correct. From the I itself, it is certainly true, totally true, that the I is what is creating everything.
So, as long as this I believes to be a person, then what is created will look as if it was personal, isn't it?
It would appear that way, obviously. But when it identifies with the concept of being a person, it can only focus on one thing that it's selected out of the whole at a time and say, I create this, I am creating this. It's selecting, out of a whole flow of energy, one object and claiming to be the creator of that. When you bring the attention to rest fully in the awareness that is prior to everything, and realise that that is the true I, that is the true identity, from there, when you're seeing the world from there, you can say that I is creating all this. You cannot say I am, because at that moment you are certainly not a person that is looking at the world.
So the way in which the dream does change when certain identification do fall apart, is it given because, in a sense, not because the world is really changing, but because your ability to see the world is wider, because those identification has been falling apart? Is it like this?
Well, your perception of the world obviously is going to be different when you realise that you are not actually a thing within the body called me. Nobody's ever found that. It does not actually exist except as one of the many concepts, one of the many images we hold about ourselves to be true, which are not true at all. When you look at the world from the me, the world appears to be out there, surrounding you, and you're somewhere in the body, although nobody will give you a definite where that me locates itself. When that drops away, it's very clear that the world, everything that surrounds the body, including the body, is taking place in you. You're the emptiness that everything is appearing in. So obviously there's going to be a totally different perception of the world. There's going to be a totally different way of looking at the world and watching how it functions.
From this perspective of the impersonal I, the sense of good and evil seems to fade out. This sometimes is taken by people that listen to this message as if there is an invitation to irresponsibility or not taking care of what is going on in the world. How do you reply to these people?
It's not possible from the viewpoint of the person to not interfere with the world. The person always identifies with one polarity or the other in any given situation. It needs that polarity, it needs to cling on to something in order to maintain its image of itself as a person. When the person is seen to be completely false and nothing more than an idea, an image, when that drops away, there is the ability to see things as they are without labelling them right or wrong. Right or wrong would always be according to how the person sees the situation. If you take two bodies living from the point of view of the person, then one could look at the left polarity and one could look at the right, and they could both decide, well, this is actually right and this is actually right, according to how they've structured their personality. And they could also switch. So what is right for number one changes, and he chooses the other polarity at a later moment, and the other chooses the polarity that the other one originally held. So you can swap around the concept of good and bad. In itself, it's just something that you choose in a sense, according to your image of yourself. When you rest in the true I, you rest in a state of witnessing, where you realise, in fact you see it very clearly, it's not an idea in the mind, you see that everything is always in balance, everything is always in harmony. The play of the left and the play of the right belong to the same pole. And if something is taking place, it has a polarity, it has a left and a right. If you choose one of them as good and bad, you're holding on to the sense of being a person. When the person has disappeared, it's not that you don't understand, it's that you see something much deeper than understanding, much, much deeper. And from there, what automatically takes place is compassion arises. You don't interfere. Also, because when you rest in the true self, you don't interfere because you're already the one that's creating things exactly as they are right now.
And is not interfering, it doesn't mean not taking care, because anyway, an action of taking care or something that can be seen as such can occur.
Well, the very fact we use the word interfering means that we're seeing what's happening around the form as something that is not in our control already. The truth is, when you rest in your true self, when you rest in the I itself and not in the me, you're controlling everything. Everything is under your control. The whole universe. We're not just talking about, the physical needs of the body or the so-called personalities world. We're talking about everything. From there, nothing is out of control. Everything is as it is.
So from this still point, out of which you view the world, everything is already perfect, already.
Everything is already complete. Nothing is missing. Nothing is too much to the left or the right. You could say the scales of justice are totally balanced. Perfect has other meanings, which is a word that we use, and I use it myself, but it isn't the correct word. The correct word would be everything is balanced, everything is complete, always. If Lao Tzu said that if you pluck a blade of grass, the whole universe shakes. I would agree with that, but I would also say that it's the whole action, the one complete action of the universe that is plucking the blade of grass. So everything is always complete. Everything is always balanced. Everything, therefore, is already as it is. Whether that's considered correct or incorrect is simply what is arising in that moment along with everything else.
Some way, paradoxically, although everything, as you say, is complete in itself, if looked by this impersonal eye from this still point, it seems that there is a kind of evolution, so to say, in the sense that this awakening, it seems to be happening more and more often, and it seems that this awakening of mass or mass enlightenment is actually happening. Is this simply an illusion, or is it like that? What do you say about this apparent paradox?
Well, awakening is always present. What we call awakening is in a sense, the withdrawing of our attention from what we imagine ourselves to be to what is. Now, the only thing that we can say is beingness itself. When the attention comes away from that which beingness is creating and back to beingness itself, awakening takes place. Well, everything, the background of everything, is beingness. So the awakening to beingness is not dependent at all upon time, obviously, because beingness itself is timeless, and it's not dependent upon a particular action having to take place, because beingness itself is actionless. So there's just a shift of perception from object to subject. The subject is beingness itself. But having said that, that could take place, and obviously has taken place in what we call time many, many times. It's not dependent upon evolution, but I would say now something is changing in the way the arrangement of consciousness itself is working, where for sure, and I'm talking about my experience, more and more people are waking up. This is happening for sure. Whether that reaches a point of mass enlightenment is another story. It would be, I would think it would be a nice world if it did, but certainly in every meeting, at least one or two people suddenly see this, sometimes just for a fraction of a second or days. You can't put a time on how long the attention remains in the timeless, but it's happening more and more. I would say, in my case, in the last 5 years, I've seen a lot of people really come into this seeing very easily, very naturally. Sometimes people who worked very hard believing that they were getting towards this, and sometimes people who have had no real spiritual life, no interest in it, suddenly clicking and it drops into place. And so I would agree this does appear to be happening, and it's not just the opinion of this form. Many people who are sharing this realization are saying the same thing. As I say, whether it reaches mass enlightenment is another story, but I would say there are more bodies living consciously now in the realization of what is actually living through the form and appearing as the form than at any other time in the lifetime of this form, for sure.
So from this point of view, we are already living in paradise, so to speak, but not through all the forms this is seen.
Well, we never live in paradise. I lives in paradise. The concept of we is made up of lots of me's in the body. When disillusion drops away and it's seen that the only one that lives through the human form is I, then paradise is already the case. Paradise is this. This is not other than paradise. We're just not seeing paradise in a clear way. We're wearing the glasses of the ego, and those glasses are filters, and we see the world in various ways when we live from the so-called personality, the ego.
So in this sense, from an aware point of view, I don't know how to say it differently, mass alignment has already happened, because in a sense, when you rest in this seeing, everything is enlightened in you. So it's already happened.
When you awaken to the truth of what you are, and you look at apparent other people, it's very obvious that they are not separate from you. What you see in them in the immediacy of that moment is that they are you. You have awakened to the realization of what you are, and they are the one who has awakened. It's only when they open their mouth that you realize that another game has to go on in that form, and of course you just flow along with it. I am not enlightened. I am this, I am in the 5th stage of enlightenment, I am in my 2nd chakra, all that stuff goes on. But all of that is just a game, it's just a play within the dream. you know, the one that rests behind the dream, watching the dream, is always I. So when I awakens to itself in a form, all it sees in the other forms is itself, I everywhere. Not loads of me's, but one I in every form that appears. So you could say that the world is enlightened by your enlightenment.
Speaking about myths on alignment, often you say that no technique or method is necessary for realization to occur. What would you say about it when people say that, for instance, they insist that there is something that can happen through meditation technique?
Any attempt to get to this has to be coming from a place where you believe yourself not to be this already, obviously. So this is the me, you see. Me, the one that has to get to I. Okay, so me will do many things to get me to the I. The me is never going to arrive at I. The me is a total illusion. Me is the one that claims to be the doer of everything that is done. So when meditation takes place, or any method is practiced, it's done with the intention of getting to something that is actually already present. This is not an attainment. When you realize what you are, nothing that has taken place beforehand is responsible for this as a result. Now the me is an incorrect way of looking at I, claiming it to be something in the body that is the instigator of what the body does. So when meditation or methods appeal and are practiced, that's fine, that's all that's going on. It's certainly not going to bring about awakening. Awakening might happen during the course of that particular action, but the action of riding a bicycle could also be, not bring about, but could be the action that is taking place when awakening happens. Lying in bed with your lover could bring it about. That it might be the action that is taking place in that moment. Typing on the keyboard might be the action of the moment suddenly awakening happens. It's not the result of anything, obviously. And this is something that really needs to be understood. That which is permanent, always present, ever the same, and therefore, is clearly the truth, that which never changes, cannot be brought about by an activity. It requires something other than the egoic action. All meditation is egoic action. It's the attempt of the me itself to try to get to the I. Well, the me has never arrived at the I, and the me never will, because the me is a concept which dies and dissolves completely before I is seen. I is not a concept. I is the direct perception of what one truly is, one's true nature, as being the source of everything. But all along, all those activities are actually the activities arising from the stillness. When they're finally not claimed by this imaginary me, you see, awakening takes place. So in one body awakening could happen during the course of meditation. In another, there might be absolutely no interest whatsoever in anything spiritual, and they step out of the pub one night and notice the full moon and awakening happens. Absolutely nothing to do with anything that takes place beforehand. At the same time, if somebody is doing meditation, that is the impersonal action in that moment taking place. It does not result in the stepping outside of action. No action in time can bring about a realization that is utterly non-active outside of time.
So what would you say to people that say, okay, meditation techniques do not bring to realization, but they seem to prepare the ground? Because my mind, they say, is more silent, is more quiet. What would you reply to that?
Well, I would hope I'm wise enough not to say anything to them. Just let them believe that there is somebody called me doing what is happening. Let them believe that there is me doing something to get to something. Somewhere along the way, the realization is going to arise in that nothing is happening. I'm not interested in interfering with other people's separate lives. You know, if somebody wants to play at being a Buddhist and getting to enlightenment, okay, that's what's happening. There's nobody doing it anyway, you see. Why would I want to interfere with that? I just watch it. But if words come from that form with the intention of trying to tell here, the one that is not searching, that is the way to get to this, then very clearly I think the words that will arise here will be 100% in the direction of nothing is happening. You're not getting anywhere. There's nowhere to get to. There's nothing to attain. Beingness is already beingness. You cannot achieve it. You cannot get to it. It's not somewhere other than right where you are. It's the self itself that is looking for the self. So I wouldn't say anything to anybody in terms of don't do that, don't go in that direction. There may be the suggestion that they turn around and look at their motive for that. And of course, if you see the motive, it's obviously based on the idea that you are not already present as that one. And it's possible when you see through the motive that suddenly you get a glimpse of the fact that you are already that which is creating everything.
So often people do turn towards meditation techniques because they feel that the mind is in turmoil, and they seem to feel that doing these techniques their mind becomes more calm and silent. So this quiet mind that is not alignment is in a sense an apparent result, is an illusion that is bringing you closer to realization.
Well, I think all evidence proves that meditation is good for the mind. It quietens the mind, and a quiet mind tends to bring about less tension in the body. So there are benefits at the body-mind level, but and that's good, obviously. You know, if the human race was meditating, we would probably have a much more peaceful and more caring, more loving human race. But we're not talking about that when we talk about enlightenment. We're talking about something that's totally outside of that. I'm not interested. Here there's no interest at all in meditation, because meditation is happening all the time, and there isn't somebody doing it. There is no technical method going on here. There's just the seeing that everything that is being seen is a manifestation of the one that is seeing it. This is happening all the time. You know, if we can call that meditation, there's no method at all. There's nobody doing a method. It just is the way it is. Now, you cannot reach that through effort. You cannot reach that through a method. It's a methodless method in a sense. It just is that way. Looking at the world and realizing the world is a manifestation of the one that is looking. Okay, if that is meditation, then meditation is happening. I'm not against meditation. I'm not against anything, because everything in itself is just pure action. And one of the pure actions that arises along with all the others is the idea that something called me has to do something to get to enlightenment. It's just an action. There's no actor behind that.
So true meditation just happens.
True meditation, finally, is all there is. Waking, dreaming, sleeping, it's all just the one self, bringing all of that into play. And in those moments where one is conscious, there's just the clear seeing all the time that this is all there is. The nothing manifesting as everything.
Changing subject, and again, this is in a sense a myth about enlightenment. You often say that the purification, so to speak, from the ego concept happens mostly after the first awakening, after the first glimpse of this, where instead in traditional spirituality there is the belief that the purification from the ego happens before the realization. Can you expound about this?
I think it's safe to say that changes take place at the level of the body and the mind after a glimpse. Now a glimpse is a moment of awakening. A glimpse is what the Zen Buddhists call satori. It's the initial touching and seeing of oneness. Now that, as far as I know, in every case does not remain. Even in the cases of the great masters and our spiritual heroes, it goes away, and then there's a period of sort of slipping into that when one is not doing anything, when one is simply drinking a cup of tea. Suddenly the oneness appears again. There's a drifting in and out of this for a period. The period, I guess, would depend upon the characteristics of the form and the degree to which the ego has established itself or not managed to. So that would, the time that would last, this slipping in and out, would be dependent on those things. But there comes a time, obviously, when you're not slipping out of it, and there's just the seeing of oneness. And at that point, everything is just what it is. There isn't anything outside of it. Everything is seen to be perfectly happening. What was the rest of the question?
I mean, like some people find difficult to believe that this purification from the ego, so to speak, doesn't happen before self-realization but afterwards. So after the first glimpse of this, like there is the mind that is coming back, it doesn't remain, as you say, and there is a kind of first process or apparent process that goes on.
Well, purification in the case of this form took place afterwards. I didn't know the words for it, but the awakening of the Kundalini and everything happened, and I guess along with that there was various moments where energy would unlock in the body, and that would be the equal of chakras and stuff. But to me it seems such a strange thing to even want to know about those things or try to activate those things before awakening, because it's not a necessity. It's a total waste of time. You again then, you see, are hearing a message which has probably got a bit scrambled up somewhere over time, that somebody who awakened was saying, oh yes, I noticed this happened in my body afterwards, and I noticed how the mind changed in accordance with that change in the body. And so somebody hearing this said, all right, so if I do that, and if I do that, and if I do that, this will happen to me at the mental level or the energetic level. And remember that the one who is describing for them what has taken place is not offering that as a solution to get to this. They're simply saying, well, you know, after awakening, I notice I was spending more time just staring at the world and chilling out, you know, without having to smoke dope or whatever, you know. And then somebody said, right, so we've got to chill out. We've got to just stare at the world. And there you've got all these people sitting, staring at a white wall, doing a thing called zazen. I could sit and stare at a white wall, I'm sure, and there are many moments where I can be just looking at a very simple object with no intention of getting or gaining from it. And suddenly somebody says, do you want a cup of tea? And the attention goes somewhere else. There's nothing being forced there, there's no effort, you know, and there's this relaxation takes place in the body simply because the tensions that are built up in the body are dropping away. They're dropping away because your view is no longer on having to correct something here. Your view is a correct view. You're looking fully back, in a sense, to the fact that you are the emptiness watching the play of the world. The body then finds its own stability. It finds, you know, I guess you could call it purification, although I don't like that word. To a degree, it needs to relax, it needs to chill out, it needs for those tensions to drop away, and that's going to vary from one body to another. And at the same time that's happening, its counterpart at the level of the mind in thought and feeling is going to naturally be purified. The result of that, obviously, is that what you could call becoming loving would take place. But there's nobody deliberately trying to be loving. You look at other people, and the first desire that arises naturally is to communicate in a happy way, in a way that you know, shares intelligence. You know, that could be described as love. But there's no lover, there's nobody there wanting to be like that. It's just the natural way of a relaxed body and a relaxed mind. So the purification, I would say, the true purification cannot be taught. It takes place all on its own once the initial awakening has taken place. To try and purify the body before that, to try and purify the mind before that, requires discipline. And discipline is guaranteed to produce tension in the body and tension in the mind. Only a relaxed brain can be fully aware. A brain that is concentrated, which obviously would be the type of brain that would be present when you're trying to get somewhere, trying to do something, is not capable of being fully aware. It's simply not able to do it. Any tension in the brain does not allow that relaxation to take place that is required before there is full awareness of what has taken place.
So after the first awakening to this, we said mind can come back and one can get identified again, or identification can happen again with the ego concept. Is it possible to stay in the witnessing of the ego concept coming back and not getting identified with it.
When awakening takes place, there isn't somebody there in a witnessing position witnessing. Now, if that happens, it happens. It doesn't happen because somebody is witnessing. There is nobody witnessing. There is just witnessing happening. When that starts slipping away, which, as I said before, in every case I know it does and has, then any attempt to re-establish oneself in the witnessing position would be coming from the me concept again. So witnessing is something that happens when there is nobody doing the witnessing. The moment there's any attempt to rest in the witnessing position, you're actually caught up in the mind games based on the concept that, the me is actually a real thing, and now the me wants to be in the position of the witnessing. So the mind does come back, and in some cases it comes back worse than before. And of course, what will happen is there'll be a sort of desperation to get back to that witnessing position, and one will find oneself possibly reading every book on the subject, watching YouTube for every so-called master on the subject. You're doing all these desperate things to try and get back to it, and at a certain moment the mind goes, I can't do it, I can't get back there. And you decide to go for a walk or something, and there you are feeding the ducks, and suddenly oneness appears again. This is a big message for the mind. Time and time and time again, the message sees, or the mind sees the message that is coming from itself, because the mind is realizing its own limitation. Me cannot bring about this realization of the I is everything. And of course it can't. It cannot do this. And so there comes a time where the me stands down, where the me accepts its limitation. Now when the me, the mind of the me, says, I really cannot do anything about this, there's a total relaxation. And then there's a waiting without waiting for anything, just resting in the moment, just being present to what is, noticing how all the wood has beautiful grain in it, how the bird's voice sounds more beautiful than before. You're present, you see, finally, without any effort. There isn't somebody there doing a method to be present. And suddenly, at some point in that, there's the opening again into the awakening. The mind must realize its own limitation. It cannot be persuaded to do that. It cannot even reach that with understanding. The mind itself must realize its own limitation, and it doesn't realize it through understanding. There's a giving up there, right there and then. There's a giving up and a total relaxing of the mind, and the mind allowing itself to just do what is necessary in the moment and stop seeking. The seeking drops away there, you see.
So is it possible to rest in this witnessing and do see the sense of the me coming back, or all the habits connected to it, without feeling anymore at the center of it? In a sense, watching, so to speak, the ego concept arise as you would see a bird flying or a cloud drifting in the sky.
Well, once there's the there's the stabilizing in the witness position, the me can still come up, a lot less than what it used to, but at the same time it doesn't hook. There's nowhere to hook anymore. So you see it literally as you would watch a bubble arising from the bottom of your beer glass or something. You know, it's just there, but it's not identified with it. I haven't got any power anymore to hook you. Basically what has happened is you've fallen in love with I, and the old lover, which was me, is no longer attractive. It's more like that than anything else. The me is still there, but not to the same degree by any means. It doesn't have the power to hook attention anymore. So therefore you don't go into stories, you don't run off in tangents, you know, and cul-de-sacs in the psychological mind anymore. You're obviously then much more present to the present moment. When you're present to the present moment, the mind is the working mind. It's not the psychological mind. It's the present mind. It's the mind that is functional and useful and becomes a friend. It's not trying to get control. It's not trying to run the show anymore. So it's not like you reject the mind. You don't reject the me that arises either. You see the me for what it is. The me is not a person. The me is the particular characteristics that are present as the body-mind, and they function in a particular way. So the me then becomes the pure personality, if you like, but it's not a person, it's a personality. It's the characteristics of the form, and being the characteristics of the form, it's also the characteristics of the way the mind functions in that particular form. I mean, one thing is clear, is one of the characteristics of this form is not football. Yet I watch people become passionate about playing it, passionate about watching it, and here, nothing, you know. It's not a judgment by any means, and it's not like I should be like that or they should be like this. It's just the way it is, because characteristically some bodies like to sit and watch football, characteristically some bodies like to play football, characteristically some haven't got any interest in it. There's nothing personal about it at all. That's the beauty of it, you see. You see that everybody and everything they're doing is in its place at that time.
Could you say that this differentiation of each form with their own characteristics can explain in a way the reason why sometimes he looks that the message of certain sharer of these differentiate from one another? You can have like a master or a teacher that shares this and another that shares it in a different way, and this can look like a contradiction or something that is different and is actually due to the characteristic of the form.
It's the way the message comes across is totally due to the characteristics of the form. What is being seen, where the message is coming from true seeing, because it isn't always like that. Sometimes it's coming from a memory of a glimpse that one had, but realised the value of that and tries to share that for whatever reason with other people. When it's coming from true seeing, the attention primarily is on the emptiness. So what comes through as an expression from the emptiness itself, not from somebody, comes through a certain set of characteristics. So, you know, Buddha, for instance, was quite a different character to Jesus, if we're to take, you know, the history as those two actually have existed. So here's Buddha with his own particular set of characteristics, and the message which was coming from the emptiness came directly through a certain set of characteristics. So it sounds different. Their message is not the same if you look at, you know, the way the message came through. You go to Jesus, different background, different social conditioning, different set of characteristics, yet the message is coming from exactly the same place as it did in Buddha and all the other masters who were masters. But it's different, it comes through in a different way. But if you start making comparisons, what you'll see is that they're all talking in their own characteristical way about the same thing. And this becomes very clear. In fact, I think for me the first comparison was with Ramana Maharshi, and I clicked straight away that what he was talking about was what had taken place here about a year before. Then I began to come across bits and pieces from the New Testament, and I wasn't looking for them. It just happened to be the book that was on somebody's table open on a particular chapter or something. And I began to see the comparisons here with what, this guy Jesus had been talking about. And then Buddhism came along, and I began to read bits and pieces of what Buddha actually stated, not what Buddhism is stating, which is not the same thing. And I began to realise, wow, this guy too was this guy too had awakened to the I. So here was Buddhism, Christianity, and the Ramana Maharshi, very different in the way they were sharing it, obviously because different characteristics. But if one could follow the words in oneself back to where the words were coming from in them, one would find that the message was coming from the same place. It's coming from silence. When Buddha spoke, the words came from silence. When Jesus spoke, the words came from the exact same timeless silence. And when, Ramana Maharshi spoke, and where these words are coming from now is exactly the same place. It's timeless, it's empty, it's nothing. And when you see this, you realise this is I. This is the I in those spiritual heroes. This is the I in the lady who serves you across the counter in the shop. This is the I of the waiter who brings your food to the table. We're all this. Every one of us is this. The message is coming from the silence all the time. Yes, sir, what would you like? Where did that come from? You can't write a book. You can't put that in some spiritual or holy book. But those words came from emptiness. And then you say, oh, I'll have number 23, thank you. Where did those words come from? The same emptiness, the same silence. So here is God playing the position of the waiter, and here's God playing the position of the eater, and communicating with itself in two forms, which it's creating in that moment, having a discussion with itself. What do you want to eat? I'll have number 21, blah, blah, blah. Perfectly normal. And this is going on every day, all day, and it's not just happening in temples and churches, it's happening everywhere. It's happening in the pub down the road, and it's happening in the bar, and everywhere you go, silence is communicating with itself. And when you realise that silence is the background and that silence is I, that is what you see. There's this natural, easy communication with every human being, even if you don't understand their language. There's a natural desire, I would say, for I to communicate with I.
Speaking about sharing this, another myth about enlightenment seems that there is the belief that after this is seen, one has to become a sharer of this verbally, or become a teacher or a guide. Is it like that all the time?
If one has to become a sharer, one will become a sharer. One cannot not become a sharer. But it isn't a necessity that one awakens to this and then suddenly has a huge desire to run around and awaken everybody else. In fact, that desire is not there when the sharing of it is true. It isn't a desire, although initially it might appear that way. It's not at all true. There are many people who awaken and continue to trundle along with daily life, doing the washing up, going to work, watching TV, whatever. It's got nothing to do with awakening. The function, and it is just a function of sharing this realization, is particular again to the characteristics of a body-mind. There's no idea that, oh, it's my job to share this, you know. There's nothing like that. It just is that way. And that doesn't come from the body-mind itself. That comes from the realignment of the way things appear outwardly. You know, suddenly people, you know, begin coming to you, 1 or 2 or 3, and they're asking you something, and you have the answer. So the answer comes out, and suddenly 3 becomes 5, and 5 becomes 50, and suddenly you've got 100 people doing a 10-day retreat with you, and you're sitting at the front looking down and noticing that the body is sitting facing all the other ones, and it's like, how did this happen? Well, it happened. You know, it is the function of the body to share it, or it isn't. There's no effort involved.
You say that there is no technique towards alignment, and there is no either any energetic process that is necessary to occur before this realization happens. Nevertheless, it is, in a sense, quite evident that sharing space with a form in which alignment had happened produce a kind of invitation to this. It seems like it's infectious in a way. What would you say about it?
Can you repeat it?
Yes. You say that nothing brings to alignment. There is no technique necessary.
Well, life brings you to it. If there is a technique, if you really want a technique, come to me and I'll give you a very, very, very big file on my computer of every single millisecond of my life. And if you can live that as a technique, there's a possibility that you will awaken at the same time I awakened. You could never do that. Life is, if there is something that brings about that moment, and I'm not saying there is because I see there isn't, if there is a technique, it's the life that you're already living, the highs and lows, the ups and downs, the ins and outs, the misunderstandings, the understandings, the whole conglomerate of your life is the technique. And there's a moment within that where something just opens up and you realise, you know, what are you doing as a Buddhist? You know, what are you going to do? Are you going to grab every millisecond detail of the life of Buddha from the moment he was conceived, not even born, but the moment he was conceived, you know, where the sperm and the egg met? And are you going to write all that down in a book? Are you going to manage to copy all of that, and you decide to take up, you know, that as your model, your method? You know, you couldn't do that in your lifetime. It's absurd to assume that a method brings you to this. Your life brings you to this, and in each case it brings the body to awaken according to the structure of the life, which even in, you know, identical twins is totally different. So it's absurd to assume you can pick bits out of one's life, you know, or somebody's life. And I've often joked about this, and I've said, you know, if Buddha had the habit of picking his left nostril with a small finger on the right hand, it would now be the technique. And if you think I'm joking, just look around at all the techniques and the methods. They're absurd. They are absolutely stupid. Yes, they bring about changes of experience in the body-mind. Yes, they might make the body feel more relaxed and easy. Yes, therefore, they would change the state of mind, but they will not bring about awakening. Awakening is not the result of anything, but, you know, if we assume it is, then we would have to assume that the moment that one awakens is because of everything, every single millisecond detail of one's life that has already taken place. It would be the result of that, and of course it isn't.
So anything bring to realization, but it seems like that sharing space and time with somebody in which enlightenment has happened, or a form through which enlightenment has been happening, it's in a sense useful. It seems to be an invitation. It seems to be more easy to see this. Like people, for instance, like to go to your meetings or like to stay with you, and some way in your company seems to be more easy to see this. What would you reply to that, to somebody saying you this?
At one time I wouldn't. At one time people were telling me this, and I thought, oh, they're just being nice. Now people tell me it, and I realise that for them, something changes when they're in a meeting, where they're present with this form. Okay, if that's their experience, then it's valid for them. It's not something I see. And yet I'm told this by other people, that when I'm with you it's so easy to see this. I can understand that, because if they're not in a steady seeing of this, they themselves, you know, not from the point of view of the body-mind, but from the point of view of the I, they will create a circumstance where they create an object called the enlightened one or whatever, and be present in the situation with that one, and start, you know, reminding themselves, if you like, bringing themselves back into the seeing, which does get easier and easier. For instance, in retreats, somebody, you know, might have an awakening, you don't see them for a year, and they come back and the mind is like a scrambled egg again, and within 10 minutes, usually half an hour, suddenly not trying to work anything out, just being present, just being, in a sense, in that mood, that field of energy that is the mood of a group of people coming together. You know, Jesus said, keep holy company. It's holy company when 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there I will be in their midst. This again is from Jesus. And it's true. When we sit down, if 20 people sit down with the intention of bringing the focus to the right place, bringing the focus to the I, it happens naturally if one person present there is living from that naturally. It just happens that way. It's not they're deliberately focusing on the I with the intention of everybody else focusing. You know, a lot of the time, you know, in retreats we crack jokes and things. It's not all about spiritual talk, and yet the focusing comes about quite naturally in the content of that. You know, and sometimes the things that are talked about seem so irrelevant from the point of view of spiritual talk, you know. You know, the one thing I'm noticing more and more now is people use this word Advaita. You know, it almost makes his body vomit. Advaita talk, Advaita ethics, Advaita do's and don'ts. For instance, you're not supposed to talk about anything personal. There isn't anything personal. There's no person anywhere. You know, for me now, the word Advaita has become, you know, a pun. You know, it triggers off a lot of laughter in many people. There's all these do's and don'ts and shoulds and shouldn'ts, which is a new form of spiritual conditioning based upon this word Advaita. And if you're not an Advaita teacher, you're not a real teacher, you know. Well, I'll tell you this now, there is no teacher here, Advaita or otherwise, There's just the sharing coming directly from the emptiness and the seeing that I is emptiness. Just that coming through all the time. And some people obviously find that a good place to be. Otherwise we wouldn't have retreats. If people didn't come, there wouldn't be a retreat. People come. People come because something happens when 2 or 3 are gathered together with the intention of focusing on I. And the I is doing all of that through those forms, not the me.
Could we say, in a sense, that a satsang or a retreat or a meeting is simply the reflection of the focusing of awareness through the form on itself? I mean, that it's not the satsang that brings the realization, but it's actually because self-realization is happening that the satsang appears in one's life.
Well, the self of that body, and the self of all those bodies, has in a sense at heart the intention to create an environment where it has a greater ability to see itself more clearly. So everybody present in any meeting is actually projecting that meeting. If somebody arrives, the meeting changes energetically. If somebody leaves, the meeting changes. The way the words are produced as questions and answers change. When you're sensitive to this, it's very clear that each person that arrives is contributing to that change, and a change obviously that is not being decided by lots of me's. It's the I itself creating the meeting, and if that's helpful, I wouldn't know who to though. Certainly not to the me. It's helpful to eradicate the me, then it's helpful. It's not what the me wants, but it is what I obviously wants, and I tends to get its own way without any insistence. It creates the outer circumstance in such a way that the me sees again and again and again that all me is an image that one holds of oneself. It's not true, it's not real, it's an illusion.
Changing subject, it seems that this realization can happen also without knowing anything about alignment. And so some people report to have a personality crisis, the personalization crisis, in which they suddenly perceive the unreality of everything, but they don't know what is going on. And there can be fear, they can even turn towards a psychiatry or a psychologist to receive some help. What would you say to somebody in which this is happening?
Well, the whole concept of being a person comes about because the mind constructs a structure which it claims to be a person. At the base of that structure is me. The me is not real from the beginning, so the structure is false, so the person is false, completely false. Now what happens is, in the effort to maintain that personal structure, the mind has to be active every single second of the day because that structure is constantly falling apart. So it has to be busy all day long restructuring itself to maintain its image of itself. So the me is always under threat. It's threatened in every circumstance. Now if you live with that threat, the body becomes stressed, the mind itself becomes stressed, and at a certain point it can't be maintained, the effort cannot be maintained, and so what you have is a personality breakdown. Now, I don't suppose there's many psychiatrists or psychologists who have awakened to the realization that they are nothing. If there are, then it's possible that if you end up sitting in the office of somebody like that, they will help you deconstruct the remaining bits of structure of the ego, the me, the person. And that would, I would say that would leave you, that would leave you in a place where a glimpse could take place. But remember, you're not dealing with a personal psychiatrist then, or a personal psychologist. When God is a psychologist or God is a psychiatrist, there's no personal stuff involved. And what happens is, in our society, because stress is something that is getting more and more built up in our society, there's huge tension in society, the Western society particularly now. It's almost impossible to maintain the self-image of a me, of a person, so it crashes. Now if you go to through the usual channels, you end up with a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and they help you rebuild another image of yourself, another structure. And then you're sort of at some point pushed out the door with a bit of medication maybe, and you go back to function in a society that is based on the concept of separation, based on lots of me's in those bodies in society. This is changing, for sure this is changing. I know psychiatrists and psychologists who've deeply questioned what they've learned and what they've been taught, and are seeing huge flaws in present day psychology and psychiatry. And this is the way it will move. It is moving in that direction. It's presently changing. And these people are, maybe to the same degree that they're awakening to what the truth of themselves, people are appearing outwardly in balance with that, and they are helping them to deconstruct those structures of ego, you see. Also there are people who are fully awake to what they are, whose work is to simply function as a psychiatrist or psychologist. I don't think for 1 second they would be functioning through the usual channels. They would just see anybody walking through the door as an empty page, and what would be written on that page would be coming from the mouth of that person, not from the file that they're given about that person. So within our society, more and more and more, the personality breakdown appears to be happening. And although the way it happens is very negative and cause for concern, it is one of the most positive things that could happen within our society. The total collapse of the concept of being a person would be the thing that would bring about mass enlightenment, if that was to come about.
Some people say that the idea for them to function without an ego seems not only impossible but threatening. And they say that anyway the ego is useful to function through the world. What would you say to that?
Well, the only threat would be to the ego, to the one that we imagine ourselves to be. That one would be threatened, because that one would have to take second place and realise it is not the doer or instigator of the action, that the action is coming directly from the emptiness itself, from stillness. So yes, for the ego concept, the one that claims to be the doer of what is done, it is a huge threat, and it's supposed to be. It destroys it, dissolves it completely in the end. But the mind, as I said before, much of the mind is psychological mind, where you're bringing in the past in order to do something that is already taking place naturally through the body, and sometimes reflecting that in the future, where you say, oh, I could do it better tomorrow. This is a psychological mind. The functional mind just puts the spoon in the bowl, takes the sugar, puts it in the coffee, stirs it, That's the functional mind. The functional mind is not an interference. The functional mind also doesn't need an ego to do things. It just watches spontaneous action happening. You see, it's obviously it's going to be very difficult to imagine that the body can function without this chatterbox sitting on its shoulder telling it you are now stirring the tea, you are now taking the second spoon of sugar, you know. But it is what happens. There are many moments in our daily life, but the mind covers them over very quickly, where the one that is running the commentary is not present, where the mind is not thinking, and yet the action happens. You know, that is spontaneous action. When spontaneity is the thing that is happening in the immediacy of the moment, there isn't a mind running a story before the action of the body. Now, we all know moments of spontaneity. Now, the idea that one could live, if that pops up, if that idea pops up, one could live in spontaneity all the time, which is the most beautiful place for the body and the mind to be, that idea that is a possibility is a huge threat to the me, because the me really believes I have to be around when anything is happening, I'm the doer of it. And it isn't. It's a complete fallacy. And in those moments of spontaneous action, which often happen, for instance, in negative ways, where an accident, a car accident takes place, the body functions and is either able to avoid the accident completely or at least lessen what could be the outcome of that accident. The person sits there afterwards in what is known as a state of shock. Well, what has been shocked is the habit of me constructing the whole story immediately afterwards. And you can be in a state of shock for hours afterwards, very aware that the body did that and the foot went down and turned the wheel and blah blah blah, whatever the story is. I'm very aware that me was not present. Oops, me was not present. You know, this is called a state of shock. You know, the not the thinking mind, but the psychological mind is shocked. It's thrown out of the situation. And of course, from the positive point of view, this can happen where suddenly you're faced with something that carries a huge impact on you, because it reflects a deep harmony. Some people get it from artwork. I've never had it with artwork, but I can understand how it would happen. When a masterpiece is painted, the body through which the masterpiece was painted is not holding the concept of a me there. There isn't a painter in the body in that moment. There is just painting happening. It's all spontaneous action. So when that comes out on a piece of canvas, there's a perfect balance of harmony and colour and shade and space in the picture. Now, it's possible for someone who is characteristically an appreciator of artwork to look at that and immediately be taken, pointed back to the place where that was actually painted from. They can be thrown back, in a sense, carried back to the emptiness. So it's possible either in the negative or in the positive for one to be thrown back beyond the me, behind the me, realising that all the action of that moment was not something one was choosing, it happened to one. This is the beauty of spontaneity. And of course, when awakening takes place, it's seen the body gets up, goes in the kitchen, chooses coffee instead of tea, but there's nobody choosing. Chooses 2 sugars instead of once, but there's no chooser. Everything is happening spontaneously. I mean, do you honestly think that this body can sit here and answer all these questions, you know, you think it's all collected in here. You think I've practiced this for the last 3 weeks before this is coming out. No, every word here is arising spontaneously. Every word, every action of this body is happening spontaneously. That is what's seen here clearly, because the me is not present anymore. And, you know, it doesn't take much to work out that that's actually what's happening where you are all the time. You are actually spontaneous movement, and yet within that spontaneous action also arises the spontaneous action of meing, and me claims the action, you see. That too is pure action, but it's not one that you give any attention to after a while. It dissolves.
A last question, maybe. You said before that this seeing can happen in a state of shock, and actually there can be fear in seeing that an action happened and nobody did it. And which is the way, in a sense, the best way to deal with fear? You often say, stay with the sensation of fear. And some people take this, and of course they hear what they want to hear, and they transform it in a kind of method of staying with the sensation. How can you say more about it? Can you explain it better?
Well, when it's taken as a method and received as an instruction, you must stay with the fear, you're doing that out of fear. You are choosing to use it as a method because you're actually afraid of feeling the fear. So it won't work. What is very clear is that we experience fear to the same degree that we are ignorant about what we fear. That means that if we stay in the presence of the fear, what will arise out of that staying in the presence of fear is the intuitive understanding of what it is that we fear. Now, the moment we have intuitive understanding of fear, the fear has dissolved. It's become intuitive understanding. Now, of all the fears we have, the deepest fear, the root fear that we have, is the fear of death. If we intuitively understand what death is, and we can only do that by remaining in the presence of the action of dying, then we awaken to the realization that what we are is not an object that can die. That would be the end of the fear of death. At a physical level, you could continue to experience fear, because that's part of the play of survival of the body. But psychological fear would completely disappear. So clearly, obviously, the answer is to stay attentively present to the feeling of fear. Allow it to unfold. Don't interfere with it, which initially, of course, the mind will try to do. I'm talking about staying with something without any intention for it to be other than what it is in that moment. And then it will unfold. It won't be guided by your intention, won't be guided by the mind, which should always be with the intention of taking you in a roundabout way away from the fear. So if you're just present to fear, and there will come a time where you won't have the energy to run away from it, what you will find is that as it unfolds, the body and the mind actually benefit from it. They don't benefit from fear when they run away from fear, because that builds a fear about fear, and therefore you end up with a bigger sense of fear. When you reach a point where there is the willingness to be present to fear, amazing things come out of it. In India they talk about the Kundalini Shakti energy. Well, when fear is strong, your body shakes. That is the Kundalini energy. that shaking that we have labelled fear is the Kundalini energy. If you can remain present to that, if it activates itself without fear, you will be willing, you'll become curious to see what will happen, and you won't know what's going to happen, so you're not intending to take it anywhere. You will become curious, and what you will find is that as each particular fear, which are all based on the fear of death, dissolve, a whole area of the body somewhere is more relaxed, more chilled out. And that, in turn, affects the rest of the body. When we claim to be a me, we are holding on to many fears, many fears. As we dissolve each fear at the level of feeling, not with analysis, not at the level of the intellect, because it cannot be done at the level of the intellect. When the fear is felt, just allowed to be felt fully, there comes a moment where that particular fear melts away, and a revelation comes out of it. A revelation immediately arises out of it, and you intuitively understand why that particular fear was there and why you were holding on to it. In this way, you can work through the fears. You don't need anybody to help you with this. And I would say it's difficult to talk about this without sounding as though I'm giving a method to somebody how to do it. What I'm trying to say is there comes a moment where you realise you've developed thousands of strategies to avoid a particular fear, and you've run out of the ability to develop yet another new strategy. What you will find in that moment is that there is no choice but to stay present to that feeling. And when you do, the outcome will be, as I've just stated, more freedom in the body, more relaxation, the body more graceful in the way it moves to some degree, and the way the mind functions is more graceful, more simple, more easy. Now when you pass through the deepest fear, which is the terror of death, and that dissolves, which it will like every other fear, what remains you will see immediately as what you really are. You're not a person, you're not something that can die, you're the eternal itself. End of the story of psychological fear. As I said, there's not a problem with physical fear. That is necessary for the continuation and the survival of the form.
Thank you to have replied to all these questions. Is there anything you would like to say to somebody that is listening to all this?
Anybody who's able to grasp anything from this conversation will not need any more words. This conversation will again and again arise naturally in their mind, in a way that finally what has been stated here will be their intuitive understanding. Enough.
Thank you.